when I was 12 years old, obviously I liked ABBA and Snoopy very much. The Hezbollah came to my school, and it's a generic word we use for those who do God's dirty work. They belong to the party of God. And they came in order to segregate the boys from the girls in the playground. So they were standing there to make sure we don't mix, because it was a mixed school and the schools hadn't been Islamicized yet. And of course, what we did was just run circles around them. We'd run into the boys' section and the boys would run into ours. But it's just one example of just the obsession of Islamists with controlling the female body and preventing mixing that is deemed to be religiously impermissible. It's funny how they always tell us when we speak about the veil or gender mixing how there are so many more important things in the world, but they spend an awful lot of time trying to control veiling and gender mixing. It's ironic. So even at 12, they viewed girls as sources of fitnah or chaos in society. And this applies even to younger children. This is a great example. This is of a musical ensemble in Iran. It's called the Parisian Ensemble. And they had to go through several photographs before the censors accepted them. This was the first photo of the ensemble, which was rejected because the girls are not veiled, though they don't need to be veiled until the age of 9 or until they reach puberty. So this is the second photo where, of course, the girls have now been veiled, but it still wasn't acceptable to the censors. They thought the girls' arms were visible and it needed to change. And this is the final photo where the girls have been put in the back and their arms and hairs have been covered. So it applies to younger children and it rots and seeps into everything. Just to give you an example, in 2013, the Iranian regime passed a law in its Majlis, or Islamic Assembly, which said that fathers could marry their adopted daughters. And the reason behind this was because they said when the girl reaches her puberty, because she's not really their daughter, there could be sexual tension between the stepfather and the adopted daughter, and therefore it's best that the father marry her, and then she doesn't need to wear a veil, and there doesn't need to be gender segregation. So it just rots and seeps into everything. The veil and the segregation that follows it is really central to the Islamist project. And their aim is to completely erase women from the public space, and girls. And of course, as Islamists, I mean people who are part of a political far-right movement trying to impose theocracies, Sharia law, similar in fundamentals to the Christian right, the Buddhist right, the Hindu right, and the Jewish right. There's an artist, his name is Philip Toledano, and he's done a series on Iranian censorship of women, calling it Portraits of Absence. And it shows how regular items that are on sale in the shops are where women are on their covers. They're black markers used to completely erase them from the packaging. And you see this on magazines and adverts. Here's another one where the woman's been completely blacked out. And when you look at these photos, I think what it tells you is that the chador, or the burqa, and the niqab are really the fabric version of this black marker. Erased, devoid of humanity, disappeared. I often compare women to the disappeared of Argentina, or the disappeared of the 1980s in the Iranian regime, where countless political prisoners were massacred, buried in mass graves, and still no one knows where they are. But this disappeared is based on gender, not political opinion and belief. And despite all the rules that they've imposed, it's never still enough for them. Every day, the fatwa factories across the world issue more rules and more restrictions for women and girls. We have a TV program called Bread and Roses. It's beamed into Iran using illegal satellite dishes. And the Iranian regime has labeled us immoral and corrupt, so it's definitely something you should be watching. And in this program, we have a segment called Insane Fatwa, and we have found a correlation between, the most stupidest fatwa versus the imam with the longest and most stupidest name. And there's definitely some scientific research that needs to be done into this, but I'm going to stand by it, despite the fact that there hasn't been evidence. So, these rules: don't bring attention to yourself, don't wear perfume, don't walk in the middle of the road, don't wear jeans, don't show your ankles or your hair, don't cycle, don't drive, don't laugh out loud, don't sing, don't slap your thighs. We do a lot of thigh slapping on Bread and Roses just to annoy them. Don't go to football matches, because really the only reason you're going there in the first place is to glare at the men's thighs, the footballers' thighs. And don't eat cucumbers and bananas. I'll leave that up to your own imagination. So, it's a well-oiled propaganda machinery that warns you against any transgressions. Here's a couple of billboards in Iran and other places, Afghanistan, for example. Now, this is a baby, for goodness sakes, and it says, "Our children are protected via hijab." And this one says, if no one wants to eat the leftovers of flies, and if you don't want to be that, then you need to be properly veiled. So there's this constant barrage of messages saying you're loose if you're not veiled. And of course, in Iran they have morality police, as they do in Saudi Arabia and in other places. ISIS has them. I read about ISIS morality police walking around with these sort of metal pinchers that tear at the flesh of women whose flesh is visible. So there's morality police, like in Iran, for example. Just recently, they hired another 7,000 morality police in Tehran alone, because they can't control women. And no matter how much they try, exactly. You're not keeping us down. So, this is a picture of it. I mean, it's constant harassment. People are stopped, they're told their hair is showing, there are fines involved, there can be up to 2 months in prison. And of course, there are vigilantes that throw acid in the faces of women who are not properly veiled, and on and on and on. Now, this is a wonderful cartoon from Persepolis. I don't know if you've seen the book and the film of Marjan Satrapi, and here she's, you've got some of the police saying, yes, but when you run, your behind makes movements that are, how do you say, obscene. And she says, well, then don't look at my ass. And she says, I yelled so loudly that they didn't even arrest me, scared them off. It reminds me of the story I heard, I don't know if it was one of our friends or what, but this woman was saying the morality police had stopped them, saying that her daughter's legs were showing, and her daughter was like 6 years old. So she took her umbrella and started beating the guy and saying, stop looking over my daughter's legs. And I guess that's a good offense. The best defense is offense, isn't it? So it isn't a lot of fuss over a piece of clothing, as we're often told. The veil and segregation that it enforces are merely the most public manifestations of what's considered women's place in society, policed at every turn. There's a wonderful Afghan-American writer, Nushin Arbabzadeh, who I've just become familiar with. She's done a wonderful piece on this, where she says that the discussions around the veil here in the West are so sanitized, whereas the really sinister campaigns, the oppressive nature, are very often completely ignored. Here's a perfect example of it. It says, have you ever seen an onion that has a worm in it? No. Because an onion has 7 layers of the chador, but the potato has a very light clothing and is always in danger of being eaten by worms. And then at the end it says, so sisters, be an onion. Be an onion. Wow, fun, profound. And in Iran, as in many places, veiling is imposed on the backs of slogans like death to the unveiled women. And in Iran, one of their main slogans was Ya ru sari ya tu sari, which means you either wear the veil or you will be beaten. And this is a cartoon where, there are Islamists in Iran saying women who aren't properly veiled should be raped. Now, don't forget, the veil is compulsory in Iran, and they're still saying this. And this is a perfect example of others fighting for girls to be brought home against Boko Haram in Nigeria, and the Iranian government's officials are saying, rape the bad hijabi girls, teach them a lesson. And of course, as you know, every calamity from earthquakes, you all remember Boopquake, Jennifer McCrite's Boopquake, to rivers running dry are blamed on unveiled or improperly veiled women. And this is a wonderful cartoon from Mana Nayastani. He shows, the officials stealing money, going to Canada, someone throwing acid in a woman's face, police beating someone who's got a banner saying freedom, executions, floggings, but here's a woman's hair and the river runs dry. It's typical, the sort of attitude they have towards women. And even if in places where it isn't compulsory, including in the West, there is this immense pressure. So there's this idea, if you're veiled, you go to heaven, otherwise you go straight to hell. I'll see you all there. The sort of, you're immoral, you're loose. In Turkey, I don't know if you heard recently about a woman who was beaten on the bus for wearing shorts. She's a nurse. And the guy was released. Though Erdogan's held so many free thinkers in prison, none of them seemed to be able to get released. But this guy got released, and he said he just thought, she was wearing improper clothing. In Britain, young women who are hijabis but aren't dressed in the way that the Islamists and the fundamentalists think appropriate are called hojabis. So there's this constant pressure. Children are veiled. Children, for goodness sakes, and no one bats an eyelid. Oh yes, I forget. Hijab is a right and a choice, even if when it regards children. Specifically speaking, though, choice is a formality when there is little right or choice to remove one's veil or remain unveiled without being vilified. This is a perfect Jesus and Mo cartoon. Muhammad says, oh, stop complaining, Jesus. You should feel protected like a precious pearl within an oyster shell. And Jesus is like, I just feel hot. And Muhammad says, the important thing is to show the world that it's a liberating, empowering choice, a symbol of your freedom to express your identity. Then he says, can I take it off now? No. And that's the thing, you can never take it off. But I think most importantly, whose side are you on? Of course, there are women who choose and have a right not to have an abortion in Ireland, but you must side with the women who want one and cannot have one because of the state's and the Catholic Church's control over women's bodies. But when it comes to us and the veil, it's the other way around. Many feminists, many liberals, those on the left, and I say that as someone firmly on the left, defend the right to be veiled, but never defend the right to be unveiled and to live to tell the tale. What a betrayal. We're told it's our culture, our religion. Leave us to it. Respect it. Well, I'm sorry. Many of us will not respect the violation of women's rights, no matter how it is packaged and dressed. Culture isn't homogeneous. Culture isn't homogeneous. Neither are communities or societies. Defending the group right to impose veiling and segregation defends the powerful. This sort of identity politics ignores and it negates dissent. It fails to see the social and political struggles and class politics. The result of all this, says Kenan Malik, the British writer, is that solidarity has become increasingly defined not in political terms, as collective actions in pursuit of certain political ideals, but in terms of ethnicity and culture. And that's exactly what the far right does as well. They homogenize culture, entire societies and communities, and immediately say that they're incompatible with Western society, so as to promote, if we're honest, what is fundamentally white politics, white identity politics. When it comes to culture, anyway, whose culture are we talking about? The woman and the man resisting the veil, or the theocrats who are imposing it? There is an immense unveiling movement in Iran, for example, even though it is compulsory and punishable by fines and imprisonment. This is a wonderful photo taken in Iran in front of a poster which says, "Sisters, you must obey your Islamic hijab." and she's there without a veil. And even men are joining this movement with messages saying that it's unfair that women should have to be covered up and that people should be free to dress as they choose. When you are faced with a state and a movement, the Islamist movement, that aims to erase you from the public space, your refusal to disappear is an important form of resistance and dissent. This is a wonderful photo at a rally organized by the Islamic regime of Iran. This is not a place you want to go to. But there's a woman without a veil with a sign saying no forced hijab. And this is a photo of Alia Magda El-Mahdi. She's an Egyptian feminist and blogger and atheist who went to a pro-hijab event in Stockholm, where she is now granted refugee status, with a sign saying hijab is sexism, not anti-racism. Oh, gasp, Islamophobia. And of course, it's not just the veil. Everything, including gender segregation, Sharia law, the right to sing in public, are all sites of female resistance. And still, there are those who prefer to side with the Islamist narrative rather than with the dissenters. In Iran, for example, the Iranian Lawyers Association opposed the implementation of Sharia in Iran when it was started. And many of them were charged with apostasy, a crime that is punishable by death. In Algeria, women's rights campaigners have fought long and hard against Sharia's family code, which is discriminatory against women. And I want you to listen to this video of these activists singing 20 years of Sharia's family code is enough.
يا نسا الكلام ما كفاش لازم نقطع الودان العدل ما يسواش كي يغيب الميزان يا ناس الجزائر غطاو الشمس بالغربال نحاجيكم يا بنات 20 سنة هبال كانوا متفاهمين سرقوا حق نساو خرجوا مهنيين داروا رايهم حسبونا من الغافلين واش رداك يا قاضي واش رداك خاف مني وفر كل موسم ثاني ما فيه السم واش رداك يا قاضي واش رداك خاف مني وفر كل موسم ثاني
It's a beautiful song. I wish we could just listen to all of it. And it's just, whenever I feel down, I listen to this because it really makes me feel great afterwards. And it just shows, including veiled women who are involved in this campaign against Sharia law and 20 years of madness. I don't know if you heard in the news recently, but there are Muslim women in India who've been petitioning the Supreme Court of India to ask for it to end the triple talaq rule in the Sharia courts there, which they say are treating women, Muslim women, as chattel. So there's this fight back in many different places. And of course, you must have heard of the campaign by women's rights activists in Saudi Arabia against the male guardianship rules there. Here's one short video on that.
شوفي، أحسن شيء تقدري تسويه تتصالحي مع زوجك.
The male guardianship rules has real implications on women's lives. I was reading about women in Afghanistan who were imprisoned because they had fled forced marriages or because they were facing violence in the home. And they were arrested, and when it was time for them to be released, they couldn't be released because their male guardian was refusing to come and take them out of prison, and they were remaining in prison. So the sort of male guardianship rules is linked to the issue of gender segregation and the superior status that men have over women. And you know, when you look at this campaign, it's such a legitimate campaign, a campaign that everyone should be supporting. But they told me, the activists told me about feminists blocking their account because they didn't want to hear from them. And Twitter has disabled countless of their accounts because of Saudi government's influence and putting pressure and, the sort of, it's always what's the word? Sorry, I can't think of the word, but trying to say that they'll take them to court if this continues. And so a lot of these accounts have been disabled. So one of the things we can do is go on Twitter, go on social media, and constantly bring up this issue, saying that we support Saudi women and men who want an end to male guardianship rules in that country. Now, you've got this sort of protest taking place in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia, and then, here in the West, you've got the Law Society issuing guidance for lawyers on how to produce Sharia-compliant wills, and in it explaining that, if it's a woman, she gets half of what a man does, and if it's an illegitimate child, we don't even use that language anymore. If it's an illegitimate child, they're cut out of the will. And if it's not a Muslim woman the man's married to, she doesn't get anything. This is guidance that they're giving lawyers in Britain. And of course, we've campaigned against it. And as a result, the Law Society apologized and withdrew its guidance. But again, the difference between what's happening very often in the West and what's happening elsewhere in protest against it. You've got groups like the British Humanist Association, for example, saying Sharia courts are people's right to religion. And the chief executive saying, after he visited a Sharia court, Anna Bethdin, saying that he was left without a single secularist reason why they shouldn't be allowed to operate. Well, I can think of many secularist and human rights reasons why they shouldn't be allowed to operate. Segregation is another issue. You've got women in Iran demanding to enter stadiums because women and men are segregated. Again, if they go into stadiums, they will cause chaos and fitnah. But always this law is couched into protecting women. We don't want women to hear offensive language, which will happen at stadiums. And of course, we don't want them looking at men's thighs. So these are the reasons that are often given. And you've got someone like Qonche Qawami. She's a British Iranian who went with a group of women's rights activists, because they do this all the time, trying to enter the stadium. She was sentenced to a year in prison, and she spent 5 months of it and was eventually released due to huge international pressures. But the difference then, when you look at how segregation is dealt with here in the West, in Britain at the LSE, the Islamic Society had a gender-segregated dinner, and ex-Muslims at LSE defended it. Because they said that it's soft segregation. I'm not sure what soft, racial segregation or gender segregation really means. And you've got a group like Universities UK, which is a regulatory body, issuing guidance for universities saying, look, if the speaker wants the hall to be separated between men and women, you must respect his wishes. And again, our question was, would you do that if the person wanted to separate people based on race? Why is it acceptable when it comes to gender? Again, that's a campaign women's rights or campaigners and secularists organized against, and we managed to get them to withdraw that as well. I think the issue here is, though, that when you look at why segregation, because people think, well, if people want to be segregated, just leave them to it. But you have to think about what's the idea behind segregation. And there was an Islamist, we were having a discussion, a debate, and he said, well, look, you should be happy that they're segregated, because if there's mixing, there will be adultery, and if there's adultery, we're going to have to stone them to death. So isn't it better that we just segregate them? And this is the rationale behind segregation. A lot of the issues are around the veil, Sharia courts. In Iran, for example, the law with regard to stoning says that the stone can't be too small so that it takes too long, and it can't be too big so that it's over too quickly. They've even got a specification of what's the right size of stone. So it's important to see the links between all of this, between the veil, between Sharia law, between gender segregation, between stoning. It is a crime to be a woman, and a woman who refuses to be disappeared. And we're not even talking about drawing a cartoon of Muhammad. We're not talking about that. You come head to head with this movement every time you breathe as a woman, as someone who's gay, if you're a religious minority, if you're a political opponent, if you're a dissenter, what have you. If you like music, take music. You know that ISIS beheaded a 15-year-old because he was listening to music on his CD player at his dad's shop recently. Here's a photo of them burning musical instruments in Libya. In Iran, there was a court case where a woman who has a music school went to take the person who stole the instruments to court. The judge said, it's fine to steal from a music school because music is haram, religiously forbidden. Female singers have been prohibited from performing solo in public since the establishment of an Islamic regime in Iran. And this is why.
انسان نشسته مؤدب در شنیدن تمایل جنسی پیدا نکنید.
و شاید خیلی از خانم‌ها تپش قلب بگیرن و اون اشکالی نداره.
Is it good?
Yes, you're beautiful.
And thank you. پس فکرشو بکن نمیتونی بخونی.
نظرتون در مورد خوندن خواننده زن چی؟
ولی متوقعمون باید یه جوری باشه که برآورده بشه.
Do you like to have concerts in Iran?
I would like it if it's possible.
خودش انقلابی ترین کاریه که توی این دوره توی ایران میشه انجام داد.
You want to be a kind of provocative?
Yes.
And this is a film made by her brother, following her trying to have a concert in Iran for female singers. And of course, this also is relevant in the West. You've got the Muslim Council of Britain in the UK telling parents that they shouldn't allow their children to listen to forbidden music, haram music. And there are schools, Islamic schools in Britain, where girls are not allowed to listen to music, they're not allowed to watch TV, they're not allowed to go on the internet, and they must be veiled, even though it's a girls' school, throughout, except in their rooms. They're not allowed to celebrate their birthdays, they're not allowed to celebrate Valentine's Day, and on and on and on. So living 21st century life, singing, unveiling, gender mixing, these are all acts of rebellion. And this is why so many women are becoming ex-Muslims as well, leaving Islam. This is a photo from Rana. She's now a refugee in Germany. We know it's her now because she's out, but she has a sign at Mecca saying, proud to be an atheist. And we started a campaign called Ex-Muslim because where we wanted people to come out and say why they'd left Islam. And we thought we'd get a couple of hundred responses. We got over 120,000 responses. It went viral in 24 hours. And here are some of them. Ex-Muslim because I'm a woman. Ex-Muslim because no 72 virgins for me. And this is actually Rehane Sultan. She's a Bangladeshi atheist and secularist. It was her brainchild. She's the spokesperson of the Council of Ex-Muslims. And it was her idea to have this campaign. Ex-Muslim because I hate what the hijab stands for and represents. And this is despite the fact that Saudi Arabia considers atheism the same as terrorism, and there are 14 states which have the death penalty for atheists, all of them under Islamic law. And even in Europe, you see so many ex-Muslims facing ostracization and vilification. Here's one university professor explaining how ex-Muslims and other native informants were the new McCarthyites, supposedly. And what gets me about this is the fact that, we're called native informants, coconuts, accused of inciting hatred and discrimination against Muslims. The Guardian wrote an article about me and said that my criticism of Islam is dangerous and even antisocial. And what struck me about that is the fact that they see us through the eyes of the Islamists. That's how they see us. They see dissent as a betrayal of the so-called Muslim community. And that's why when I was at Goldsmiths, I don't know if you saw this, it went viral, this video, but I was speaking at Goldsmiths University, and the Islamic Society tried to cancel my talk, and when they couldn't cancel it, they came and they threatened people, and they shut my PowerPoint, shut the lights, constantly talked while I was talking, laughed when I talked about the hacking to death of Bangladeshi bloggers. And after this event, the Feminist Society and the LGBTQ plus societies issued a statement of solidarity with them against me, And that's, this is that perspective that sees dissent, that sees the Muslim community as homogeneous and cannot fathom that we dissent, that we also have free thinkers and feminists and socialists and secularists amongst us and atheists. And it's the same perception that the Islamists have of us. We are the property of the community and society, and we are the biggest traitors when we transgress norms. Here's a photo of Kurdish fighters burning the ISIS flag when they liberated an area. And what this reminded me of is a few years ago at a International Humanist Congress, I stood up and I tore the ISIS flag. And in the film that's being taken of me, you can hear someone saying, "Oh my God, what a racist." And I think what racism for this person to equate ISIS with Muslims, I am offended on behalf of Muslims, I'm sorry. I'm an atheist, but I am offended on behalf of my family, my friends, so many people that I work with who are Muslims, who are standing at great risk on the front lines against the veil, against gender segregation, against Sharia courts. Here's a photo of a Kurdish fighter breaking down the ISIS sign, which tells women how they need to be dressed. Remember those black markers. And I love the fact that she's a woman doing it. I love this photo. I'm sure you've seen this, but women coming into liberated areas and removing that burqa. And look at the color underneath, the individuality, the color. There's so many protests going on. I'm sure you haven't even seen any of these photos because of the way, the Muslim community has been homogenized. This is a demonstration in Afghanistan where, and you know what the sign says? It says the filthy hands of the merchants of religion need to be removed from our country so that every day we are not witness to the suffering of Farkhondes and Rakhshanes. Farkhonde was a woman who was killed. Rakhshane was a woman who was stoned to death by the Taliban. This is in Afghanistan. Yes, exactly. This is more from Afghanistan, calling for justice. This is the mothers of Khavaran. The Iranian regime killed in the 1980s. It's called the Bloody Decade as a way of maintaining its rule. Don't forget, Islamism has been maintained in our societies through brute force and violence. They killed possibly up to 30,000 people, buried them in mass graves. One of those mass graves is called the Khavaran. The Iranian regime called it the place of the damned. But the mothers and families of those killed and buried there went there, put flowers there all the time, despite the fact that they're beaten and arrested by security agents. And it's called Khavaran, a place for flowers and meadows, the meadows of Khavaran, rather than the place of the damned. This is where all the communists and the atheists and those who have no God were buried. Because in the 80s, they had 5-minute trials. They asked, do you believe in God? If you said no, you were executed. Do you continue to agree with your political party that you're affiliated with? If you said yes, you were sent off to execution. And families were told to pay for the bullets that it cost to kill their children. And they were never given their bodies. They went to this place of the damned and dug with their hands to try and find some of their children. This is what Islamism has been built on. So please don't tell us it's a right and a choice. This is another brilliant thing. I don't know if you've seen, but there were mass demonstrations in Iraq, in Baghdad, with signs saying neither Sunni nor Shia, but we want secularism and a civil society. And in July 2015, there's the Kurdistan Secular Center. We've just done an interview with them on Bread and Roses. You should listen to that. In 45 days, in Iraqi Kurdistan, which is an area of war, which is an area where there are nationalist groups fighting for power, where the Islamists have a stronghold there, they collected 100,000 signatures in defense of a secular constitution in Kurdistan. And we're talking about a population of 5 million. That is a hell of a lot of people in support of a secular constitution. We never hear about that. We just hear about how much people need the veil and gender segregation and Sharia law. It's with these dissenters, with the women's rights campaigners, with the free thinkers, the atheists who are challenging the Islamists, that we must firmly stand, not continuing to promote the Islamist narrative as the cultural relativists do, and also not standing, or at least justifying, the far right, which some do, unfortunately, who are placing collective blame and who are refusing to see this mass resistance and dissent. Stand not with identities, but with those fighting for political ideals that are our own: equality, secularism, freedom, whatever their background, gender, race, nationality. Now, I'm going to end with this one video that is heartwarming. Don't forget, this is 1979 Iran. We're 30 years past this time. 1979 Iran, demonstration against compulsory veiling in Iran.
Le 8 mars n'est ni un jour de l'Est, ni un jour de l'Ouest, c'est un jour mondial. À l'aube de la Révolution, les femmes sont oubliées. Nous sommes des femmes iraniennes, nous ne resterons pas enchaînées. Sans la libération des femmes, la révolution n'a aucun sens. D'autres slogans: nous ne voulons pas de voile obligatoire. Les femmes luttent et leurs luttes sont victorieuses. La police a tiré des coups de feu en l'air et essayé de les faire reculer. Les femmes ont crié: nous n'avons pas peur, nous n'avons pas peur. Et ce jour-là, dans Téhéran, partout, des femmes discutent passionnément. Une femme qui ne porte pas le voile nous a dit: manifester dans les rues contre le voile, ça a été l'occasion d'une grande tendresse et d'une grande solidarité entre nous. Le voile, c'est une histoire d'hommes. C'est incroyable. Ce sont toujours les hommes qui défendent le voile. Quel genre de vêtements
Il y a des années que je mets le tchador. Le tchador m'empêche de bouger, de travailler, de tenir mon enfant par la main. Mais je ne suis pas venue à la manifestation pour ne plus mettre le tchador. J'ai 6 filles et je suis venue pour que mes filles ne soient pas obligées de mettre le tchador, pour que les hommes ne l'obligent pas à le mettre.
And I think I want to end with this one slogan from this day, because that movement continues today in the unveiling movement in Iran and has had huge effects across the Middle East and North Africa. Rights are not Western, they are not Eastern, but they are universal. Thank you.